let's take a look at this app.js file that we worked on the last few episodes. We're done with the code, but one thing is that it's all stored within a single file. It would be nice if each of these could be stored within their own modules. But browsers don't support modules yet, so we have to use a module bundler like Browserify or Webpack. Now, you learned a bit about Webpack using vue-loader, but why don't we set up one from scratch? We'll make our own Webpack config file. Now, I will give you a heads up though, there's some confusing parts, and you're going to see that it's kind of tricky to set up. In the next episode, I'm going to show you an alternative version that I think you'll find to be way simpler. Okay, so let's just get started. We're going to say module.exports equals an object, and this will be our Webpack config. Now, we will have to pull that in by saying require Webpack. And so it sounds like we need to install that through NPM, like this. NPM install Webpack. And we do want the 2.0 version, but this probably won't work. No. Let's grab a specific one. How about 2.2 release candidate 3 and run it again. Okay, we'll give that just a minute. So now we'll find a executable within node modules bin, and you'll find Webpack here. Now if we run it though, our configuration is incomplete. So it found the file, but we didn't even specify the output, so it's failing. Okay, let's get started. The entry point, well, we're going to have that in our resources directory. Now, out of the box, Laravel ships with a resources assets JS folder, and then there's an app.js file within it. We just deleted it a couple episodes ago to keep it simple, but we're going to start bringing that back. So I will say alert app.js here, and that will be our entry point. Resources assets JS app.js. Next, we have to specify the output, and specifically, we want to give it a path, a file name, and then also the public path. So our output path will be the public/JS folder. So we could say, let's do this. Let's pull this in. Let path. Basically, we're going to require an absolute path. So I can say path.resolve, beginning at our project root, and specifically, I want the public JS folder. So yeah, this will resolve to an absolute path to the JavaScript folder. Next, the file name can be anything we need. How about bundle? And then finally, the public path. Some tools and plugins will use this, and specifically, it can be useful in situations where, for example, in production, your public path will be different than in development. Maybe in production, you store all of your images on a CDN, and that needs to be unique. So that's where this comes into play. Let's just default to the public directory for now. Okay, so let's go ahead and run this, and it compiles down to bundle.js, and there it is. So here's all of the Webpack initialization. And then at the bottom, we'll see our alert here. Okay, great, this is working. So now we can begin migrating some of this code over. We start with our errors class. So I'm going to grab all of this, bring it out, and this is kind of related to like the core of our little framework here. So how about JS core errors.js? And then at the bottom, we can expose this to the outside world. Export default errors. All right, nice and contained. Next, we're going to do the exact same thing for the form class. Resources, assets, JS, core, form.js. And let's go ahead and grab that. There we go. About 130 lines, paste it in, and then export it. Okay, look good? Now, if we come back, we have our main Vue instance, and that can be like our entry point. So we're going to put that here. Okay, so right off the bat, this needs form. We can import it. Import form from our core form class. So we're just grabbing it right here. However, think about it. If we go back to form, form depends upon the errors class. So we need to make that one available as well. Like so. Cool. So next, we need a Vue instance. And you'll remember, in the last couple episodes, don't worry, you don't have to watch those if you skipped over them. But one thing that we did is we imported our Ajax library, Axios, and then Vue. And that's fine, but why don't we just bundle them all up together? So I'm going to get rid of these and install them through NPM, like this. NPM install Vue. Okay, and then we also need Axios. Okay, great. So now if we switch back, we're going to reference Vue, import Vue from Vue, and then import Axios from Axios. Now, if we think about it, form and Axios, those are things that we probably want to reference all over our project. So in these situations, I think it's good to have a couple global objects or items on the window object. So with that in mind, we could say window.axios and then assign it, and then do the exact same thing for form. And that way, in any of your files, if you need to submit a form, you can just say new form, and you don't always have to import it over and over. It's useful. Okay, so let's go ahead and run this again and compile it down. But now you'll see that we have all of this stuff here, all this junk. These are all the modules. One thing you can do is rerun it and add hide modules, like so. And now it works. Next, the thing you can do is add the watch flag, and this will compile, but it will also watch for changes. So now if you were to change anything at all, it will recompile down. It's your watcher. So why don't we do this? Why don't we take all this junk and move it to an NPM script, like this. At the very bottom, package.json. We're going to change this, and we'll say Webpack. And now when you're within an NPM script, you don't have to prefix node module/bin. You can just assume the executable. Okay, so let's duplicate this, and we'll say dev, like so. So now I can run npm run Webpack to compile it down. But also I can say npm run dev to boot up my watcher. And now I don't have to memorize all of that. Great. So if you take a look, if we go back to project/create, we've reduced 3 HTTP requests down to 1. However, we're still referencing app.js rather than our bundle. Well, if we come back to app, it's empty, right? So why don't we do this? Let's just bring it back. I'm going to delete everything up there. Get rid of the gulp file. That's no longer necessary. Our Webpack file will now output to app.js. Okay, so let's run that one more time. npm run Webpack. And now that'll give us our app.js file. And this contains all of the code for Vue and Axios. And then at the very bottom, we'll find our main code. Okay, so now we are importing that at the bottom. Let's view it in the browser. However, I'm not seeing anything here. So I'm going to hit Shift-Command-C to open up Chrome DevTools. And this is an important one to pay attention to. Failed to mount component, template, or render function is not defined. So you'll find that when you require Vue through NPM, by default, it's going to pull in a different version than you're used to. If we go to Vue's website to guide installation, yeah, you'll see that there's 2 different builds. So you're going to have a standalone build as well as a runtime-only build. Now here's the important thing. The standalone build includes the compiler and supports the template option. Next, we can see, by default, the NPM package exports the runtime-only build, and we've been used to the standalone build. So if we want the standalone build, we need to make sure in our Webpack config file that we register an alias and we have it point to the proper path. Okay, so let's come back to Webpack config, and we're going to paste this in, like so. All right, let's give it another shot. Now we're going to use the standalone build. Now you will get a couple warnings here. This is new in Webpack 2. You can disable it if you want. It's just giving you a heads up, hey, this file size is getting a little large. But do keep in mind that we could extract our vendor libraries if you want, and for production, you would, of course, minify or zip this up. Okay, anyways, let's go back to Chrome, give it a refresh, and that should get rid of the error. Okay, new project, fill this out. New description, create, project created, wahoo. And if we give it a refresh, now that shows up. Okay, so I think that was a successful migration. I know it introduced a little bit of complexity, but the benefit is once you have your build process all set up, it's going to simplify your code a lot. Because now everything's not bundled up into a main.js file. You can create dedicated modules. For example, let's create the obligatory example component. Something like this. This is our root Vue instance, and we're now going to have an example component. So let's pull that in. Import example from, and I'm going to store this within a components folder. Okay, so resources, assets, JS, components, example.js, and this will export a Vue instance. The template will just be, how about just hard code, hello world, like so, very simple. So now we are importing that. We are registering it as a child component, which means in our Vue, we could do example. Let's give it a shot. We're going to compile it down again. And then I'm going to go to project/create and anywhere. How about at the very top, we're going to spit that out just to take a look. So come back, give it a refresh, and there's hello world. We have our custom component. So this is all looking good, but we're not really done with our Webpack config file yet. This is pretty remedial. What about things like production? For production, you want to minify this code, but we're not doing it here. Okay, well, we would probably have to do something like this at the bottom, where we could say if, and we're going to check the environment. So we'll do something like, if the node environment equals production, then we want to apply minification. And minification, it's kind of a time-sensitive process, so I only do things like that in production. Now, we can apply any plugin by using module.exports.plugins. So let's do this. Let's say plugins will default to an empty array, and then I'm going to push to that. So let's push a new plugin. Specifically, this will be an Uglify.js plugin. So we can say new webpack.optimize.uglify.js plugin. And we'll set, let's turn on source maps, and then we'll say compress warnings false. Okay, so let's give that a shot. Now I could say export node environment equals production, and then run node modules bin webpack. So now we're running this within a production environment, but we're going to see a syntax error, unexpected token name. So the problem is we are writing ECMAScript 2015 code, but for production and minification, we do need to compile that down to something a bit more vanilla JS that all browsers understand. So we're going to pull in Babel for that. We'll register a loader. So I can say for module loading, I have a handful of rules. And if you're familiar with Webpack loaders, this should be familiar to you. So specifically, we're going to test for any .js files, but I do want to exclude the node modules folder. And then finally, I want to apply the Babel loader. So this basically gives us a regular expression to track down files and then apply any action or transformation that we need. So we run it, but I think it should fail. Yeah, it can't find our Babel loader, obviously, right? So we're going to install that. Give that a minute. But it's still going to fail again if we run it. All right. Can't find module Babel core. So, this is kind of the ecosystem you have to deal with. So now we got to pull in that. And it's not bad for a single project, but when you want to start up a new project and quickly get going, this stuff can wear you down. But anyways, we're going to pull that in and finally give it another run. And hopefully this will compile down. Now we can see here, it still doesn't seem to be working. And that's because we don't have a Babel configuration file. So yet again, another thing we have to do. So Babel RC, and let's specify some presets. Specifically, we want the ECMAScript 2015 preset, and that'll pull in basically all of the plugins we need to make ECMAScript 2015 code compile down to vanilla JavaScript. Now, specifically, because Webpack 2 supports modules, we can tell it, you can ignore that. Modules is false. Okay, so let's give that another try. But once again, it fails because we have to pull in that dependency now, and you're just expected to know all of this stuff out of the gate. It's rough. So let's do npm install babel preset es2015 and save that. Okay, one more time. And now it compiles down. Next, I'm going to forget this command probably. So why don't we do the exact same thing that we did before? We're going to set up a production build script where I can paste that in. Next, let's add hide modules as well. And yeah, I think this will be a little cleaner. npm run production, and that'll compile everything up specifically for your production environment. Now, if we take a look at this, you'll see that yes, it has all been minified. Great. Now, there are some other things you might want to do for production to make this a bit more real world. Let's go back to Webpack config. What we could say is in a production environment, why don't we push another plugin here? And specifically, we want a Webpack define plugin. So basically what we're going to do here is track down any references to process.environment and specifically node environment. And we want to make sure that returns production. And with Vue, this will disable all of the warnings and stuff like that. We don't want to see that in production. But then, yeah, there's even other stuff we might want to do. For example, one concern is that because we've bundled up Vue and all of our libraries with our application code, well, that gets served as one file. And you might want your server to cache that as long as possible. But now every single time you change a little bit of application code, for example, let's just say here, something as simple as you're cleaning up some code or you're adding a new attribute. Once that compiles up, you have to bust the cache even for the JavaScript libraries that haven't changed. And those are usually very, very large. So one option you might consider is to create one bundle for your app code and then another bundle for your vendor libraries. For that, you could do something like this. So here we'll have our app bundle, and then we're going to have another one for our vendor bundle. And we're just going to specify some libraries that we're using, such as Vue and Axios. Maybe if you have jQuery or Lodash, you could include those as well. Next, if we scroll down, we could register the Common Chunks plugin, like this. New webpack.optimize.commons chunks plugin. And specifically, vendor. So that will correspond to this. So now we should have a new vendor.js file that will contain our JavaScript libraries alone, and those will no longer be present in app.js. Let's give it a shot. We're going to run production. Whoops, we have an error. Let's see. New Webpack Optimize Commons chunk plugin. And this should be names. I always miss that. Okay, so let's give it one more try. And this should compile down, but it didn't. Damn it. Error in chunk vendor entry app.js. Multiple assets submit to the same file name. Oh, okay, so here's the issue. We're now specifying what our output should be, but we're hard coding this. What we can do is change this to name, and this is like a special sequence that Webpack will detect and replace it with the appropriate name, in this case, app.js. All stuff you just need to know. It's confusing. And this isn't even your application. This is just the front-end build process. But nonetheless, now you have your app code as well as your vendor code. So in fact, why don't we run this unbundled or uncompressed, but it's still minified. You know what it is? It's because we've updated the environment. What we have to do here is be explicit, like this. Okay, so now that we're explicit, it will perform in the development environment. And here's our vendor and our app code. So you'll see that our app code now is a lot simpler. It's just literally our application code. But the vendor is where we will have our Vue reference and our Axios library. So at this point in your layout file, what you would do, if we scroll down, you would have two scripts here. You'd have one for your vendor libraries, and this can be cached a year at a time because you'll never really need to bust the cache. But your application code, that can bust, and it's not the biggest file in the world, so it's not as big of a deal. Your vendor libraries, those are large things, and that can be cached as long as possible. Anyways, yeah, in conclusion, it's a lot for you to understand, right? You're just trying to learn Vue, but you have to learn Webpack. And this is kind of a standard, regardless of the JavaScript framework you use. These are things you have to figure out, and it's good for you to know. But in the next episode, I want you to consider all of the things we had to know and all of the things we had to install and all of the files that we had to create just to make it work. In the next episode, I'm going to show you something you might like more. Stay tuned.